2013 was a pivotal year for the UFC. The sport had already grown into a global powerhouse, but two fighters would take it to new heights. The first was, of course, Connor McGregor.
Hard work, but you know, we got it done. It's in the bank for life. You know, you put something in the bank, maybe it's not going to be there for life. You might spend it.
Big Irish balls all in your face.
The other, an absolute powerhouse, a former Olympian who would change women's MMA forever, Ronda Rousey. At this point, the UFC had been around for 20 years, but there were no signs of a women's division anytime soon, and Dana was pretty adamant about it. So what changed Dana's mind to go from this?
What's the official?
I mean, I don't know what you'd call that, but yeah, he's on leave until he gets his life together. Call it a suspension, call it whatever you want.
Are you beating anyone up?
This isn't my car.
When are we going to see women in the UFC, man?
Never.
Never? Never? All right, have a good
Thank
night,
you
man.
guys.
Thank you.
I appreciate you, man. Definitely. Thank you guys.
Have a good night, dude.
To this.
What did she mean for the UFC?
She was huge at the right time and the right place. And women's fighting is where it is today because of her. And she was one of those athletes like...
Before women had a place in the UFC, the promotion was already a multi-billion-dollar giant, with stars like George St. Pierre and Anderson Silva leading the way. But for female fighters, well, they didn't have much choice. The most serious opportunity offered was Strikeforce. This MMA organization, which was around since 1985, had built a reputation for giving women real opportunities to compete. Strikeforce introduced fans to top female fighters like Gina Carano and Chris Cyborg. Their 2009 fight was quite huge for the time, the first time a major women's MMA fight headlined a card. It proved that people cared about women's MMA, but Uncle Dana wasn't convinced that there were enough talented female fighters to create full divisions. Then in 2011, the UFC bought Strikeforce, taking in its fighters and contracts, but still fighting under the Strikeforce organization. And one of those fighters would become Dana's favorite. From an early age, she was an elite judo competitor, just like her mom. The apple doesn't Uchimata far from the tree. At just 17, Ronda stepped onto the Olympic stage, competing in judo at the 2004 Games. And just 4 years later, she became the first American woman to win an Olympic medal in the sport. But medals didn't pay the bills. After the Olympics, she found herself scraping by, working odd jobs just to get through the day. Then she tried to try her hand at MMA, and boy oh boy was it the right decision. One might call her a one-trick pony, but man did it work. One by one, every opponent would get grabbed, end up on the floor in a millisecond, and then end up in an armbar. Oh, and yeah, every victory came in the first round. Ronda sure had a talent for violence. Well, more so for grappling than striking.
Things that make her most dangerous, and experience.
Truly the product of the man known as Wayne.
Oh, absolutely.
Cheers. Ronda over the top.
Good head movement.
Oh.
And again,
She ducks. Did a top 10 all-time list.
and you gotta wonder.
But on that later, in late 2012, Strikeforce merged with the UFC. No one saw that one coming, and this was one of the historic moments for the UFC. Ronda Rousey was officially signed as the first female fighter in UFC history. Not only that, but she was immediately crowned the inaugural UFC Women's Bantamweight Champion. And not everyone agreed with this move, but it turned out to be the right one.
UFC, but I think Ronda Rousey should have definitely fought for the title first. Made a #1 contender against somebody else, but who am I to argue with the UFC?
Her first fight under the UFC name was at UFC 157 against Liz Carmouche. This was also the first time in history that a women's bout headlined a UFC event. It seemed Dana changed his mind regarding no women in the UFC quite a lot. Wonder why that is. As expected, Ronda finished the fight as all the others before. First round armbar. After her UFC debut, Ronda went on one of the most dominant championship runs in MMA history. Miesha Tate, armbar. Sarah McMahon, TKO via knee to the body.
And again. Looking to finish it.
Alexa Davis manhandled and knocked out in 16 seconds.
Right away by Davis. Good overhead right by Ronda. And a big throwdown. Can she do it right here? It's all over. Just.
Kat Zingano submitted in 14 seconds.
Tonight's fight clock. Wow, right down. Look at that. Tonight's fight clock brought to you by Bud Light, Joe. Perfect fit for whatever happens. Ronda wants to make it.
By 2015, Ronda was a superstar in and out of the sport. She was making headline after headline. She was even cast in blockbuster movies like Furious 7 and The Expendables 3, and Dana was smiling from ear to ear. Her and Connor were bringing in the big bucks. She was basically a walking, talking ATM for the UFC. Pay-per-view sales through the roof. Every time Ronda fought, the numbers skyrocketed. Merchandise, the UFC was slapping her name on everything. Shirts, posters, video games. If it had Ronda's face on it, it was selling. Sponsorships, big brands lined up to throw money at her. And guess who got a nice cut of that? The UFC, of course. The UFC wasted no time marketing her as a global superstar. Every movie appearance made her an even bigger name, which meant even bigger paydays for Dana and the company. For a guy who once said women would never fight in the UFC, Dana sure didn't seem to mind cashing in when one of them became the sport's biggest draw. Soon enough, there was talk that she was so good that she could beat other male professional fighters, like other fighters in the UFC and even Floyd Mayweather. Yup, that was the consensus back then. Ronda Rousey, Dana White, and plenty others claimed that she could beat Floyd in a no-rules fight.
Box Floyd would tear her up in a boxing match. In a street fight or in an MMA fight, not only would she beat him, she would hurt him badly, okay? That's what I said.
MMA fight. You think what would happen if they fought in MMA?
Yeah, I agree with Joe. She would definitely beat him. She'd beat him and she'd hurt him bad.
But in 2013 and 2014, the women's division was still in its early stages in the UFC, which meant that the competition was only going to get better over time. At the time, Ronda's skill set was on another level compared to most of her opponents. She had set the standard for the time, and it was high. But there was one problem that was quite obvious. One thing she seemingly couldn't master: striking.
And again, she
ducks hit a top 10 all-time list.
And you gotta wonder if Ronda starts
Skill everywhere.
Oh!
Ronda was absolutely dominant when it came to judo and grappling. She was a powerhouse. Once she got her hands on you, the fight was essentially over. The early UFC women's bantamweight division didn't have many high-level strikers. Most fighters she faced either weren't experienced enough or were already on the canvas before they got the chance to throw a single strike. In fact, because she was winning so quickly, some people started to believe that she was a dangerous striker, especially after her knockout win over Beth Correa at UFC 190. That may have been the moment everything started to go wrong. As you know, in the fight game, knockouts sell. Whether it was her own idea or pressure from those around her, Ronda started to drift away from her judo and began trying to box. She worked with striking coach Edmond Tarverdian, and in his eyes, Ronda wasn't just a good striker, she was gonna be elite. In one of the most infamous clips in MMA history, Tarverdian can be heard saying, "Good head movement, champ. Beautiful head movement." There was no head movement. By then, she was only 2 years in the UFC, and she was the best. She was bound to stay on top and get even better, right? Ronda wasn't a bad fighter on the feet, but she wasn't a natural striker. And against the right opponent, this flaw would soon be brutally exposed. Enter Holly Holm. Unlike Ronda's previous opponents, Holm was a bit different. She was a multiple-time world champion boxer and an elite kickboxer. If there was anyone built to expose Ronda's striking weaknesses, it was Holly. And Ronda really wanted to prove that she could strike with someone of such caliber. From the opening bell at UFC 193, the difference in skill was obvious. Holm's footwork was crisp and fluid, and she was picking Ronda apart. Every time Ronda lunged forward, Holm made her pay with sharp counterstrikes. Then in the third round, the impossible happened. Holm set it up perfectly. A left high kick straight to Ronda's jaw. She collapsed to the mat, and just like that, her reign was over.
Ronda has had, other than the Misha Tate fight. This is not what Holly wants.
The MMA world couldn't believe it. One of the most dominant champions of the UFC KO'd in such brutal fashion. Most champions, when they lose, take it as a wake-up call, but Ronda, she vanished. While most fighters would at least acknowledge their defeat, Ronda refused to even talk about it. Instead of taking responsibility, she shut down completely. She didn't return to the gym, she didn't work on fixing the holes in her game. Instead, she went on Ellen months later and admitted that she had suicidal thoughts after losing.
I was like, what am I anymore if I'm not this? And I was literally sitting there and like thinking about killing myself, and then exact second I'm like, I'm nothing. I'm like, what do I do anymore?
Here, we saw that the loss had done her mentally much worse than anybody thought. She didn't know who she was anymore. She was always a winner. How could she possibly lose? Her mind just couldn't compute it. When she finally returned, the UFC wasted no time giving her a title shot against Amanda Nunes. Dana needed her to get back to the top. He needed a shiny gold star to start printing money again. But in hindsight, this was a huge mistake, because if Holm exposed Ronda's striking, Nunes obliterated it. She was the best female striker in the division. Fast, powerful, and aggressive. And unlike Holm, who had taken her time, Nunes went straight for the kill. From the opening bell, she landed bomb after bomb. Ronda had no answers. No takedowns, no defense, no beautiful head movement, and the fight lasted 48 seconds.
Presionando Nunes, ahí la vimos conectando un golpe tras otro. Ese cruzado fueron.
And with that, Ronda Rousey's MMA career was over. She just didn't know how to take the loss. She ran out of the cage and was never to be seen again in MMA. She left the sport completely, never addressing her losses, never admitting that her striking was a problem, and never showing any willingness to grow from the experience. She was the exact opposite of how great champions handle defeat, and that's what made her fall from grace so dramatic, because for all of Ronda's greatness, she never learned how to lose. Ronda Rousey was gone, but the damage control had just begun. See, while Ronda was struggling to process her loss, Dana White had his own problem to deal with. For years, he had built the women's division around one person, Ronda. She was the face of women's MMA, the biggest star the UFC had at the time, and the reason Dana even gave women's MMA a chance in the first place. And now, his golden goose was cooked. Dana knew the Rousey era was over, but instead of admitting it, he went into full PR mode. He downplayed the loss, barely even talking about how Ronda got exposed. He praised her legacy, shifting the focus away from her flaws. And most importantly, he protected her from criticism. Even in interviews, he refused to say anything negative about her. Instead, he talked about how she was one of the greatest and how she had nothing left to prove.
She's, she's so competitive, she's devastated, but she's a lot better than she was in the Holly Holm.
It was like he couldn't admit she had flaws, because the second he admitted that, it meant admitting that the UFC had coddled her. And coddle her it did. Because at the end of the day, Dana and the UFC had built Ronda up to such an extreme level that when it all collapsed, nobody knew how to handle it. And so Dana's favorite girl was done for, out of the sport for good. After a break, she transitioned to WWE wrestling, and there is no way in hell we will ever see her in the octagon ever again.